The wind howled through the mountains like a wounded animal when Ethan Zeller found the bundle in the snow. Nothing more than a scrap of cloth wrapped around something small and impossibly fragile. He had been checking his trap lines that bitter January morning in 1876, 3 miles outside of Leadville, Colorado, where the elevation made winter a merciless thing. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a wounded animal or abandoned supplies from a passing wagon train, but when he heard the weak cry cutting through the blizzard, his heart nearly stopped. Ethan dropped to his knees in the snow, his thick gloves fumbling with the frozen fabric. Inside was a baby, no more than a few weeks old, with lips turning blue and tiny fists clenched against the cold. The child's breathing was shallow, barely there, and Ethan knew he had maybe minutes before hypothermia claimed this small life completely. Without thinking, he unbuttoned his heavy wool coat and pulled the baby against his chest, rewrapping his coat around them both. The warmth of his body was the only chance this child had. He ran. His cabin was a mile away, and Ethan ran through snow that reached his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps as the altitude and exertion burned his lungs. He was a man used to solitude, used to the harsh demands of mountain life, but nothing had prepared him for the terror of holding a dying infant against his heart. The baby made small sounds, whimpers that were barely human, and Ethan whispered prayers he had not spoken since childhood. When he burst through the door of his cabin, he went straight to the fireplace, building up the flames until heat flooded the small space. He kept the baby against his skin, knowing that gradual warmth was what the child needed, not sudden heat that could shock the tiny system. He had seen men die from warming too quickly after frostbite, and he refused to let this baby suffer the same fate. Hours passed. Ethan sat in his rocking chair, the baby tucked inside his shirt, and slowly the child's breathing became stronger. The blue tinge faded from those tiny lips, replaced by a healthier pink. When the baby's eyes finally opened, dark and unfocused, Ethan felt something crack open inside his chest. He had no idea how to care for an infant. He was 32 years old, had never married, had lived alone in these mountains for the better part of a decade after leaving his family's ranch in Texas. But looking down at this small life he had saved, he knew he would figure it out or die trying. The storm raged for 3 days. Ethan kept the baby warm, fashioned diapers from old shirts, and heated goat's milk from his small herd, feeding the infant with a cloth soaked in the liquid. It was not ideal, but it worked. The baby was a girl, he discovered, with a fine dusting of dark hair and eyes that seemed too aware for someone so small. He talked to her constantly, his voice filling the cabin that had been silent for too long. "You are a fighter," he said on the second day, watching her suckle at the milk-soaked cloth with determination. "Most babies would not have survived what you went through. You must have an angel watching over you." He wondered about her mother. What kind of desperation would drive someone to leave their child in the snow? Had she died nearby? Was she lost in the storm? When the weather cleared, he would search, but the blizzard had been severe. The chances of finding anyone alive were slim. On the 4th day, the storm broke. Ethan bundled the baby carefully and set out to search the area where he had found her. The landscape was transformed, everything buried under 3 feet of fresh powder. He searched for hours, looking for any sign of a camp, a body, anything that would explain the abandoned child. He found nothing. The snow had erased all traces. He reported his finding to Sheriff Morgan in Leadville that afternoon, the baby still tucked against his chest. The sheriff, a grizzled man in his 50s, looked at the infant with sympathy. Could be the mother was with one of the wagon trains that got caught in the storm, Sheriff Morgan said. We have had reports of several groups trying to make it through the pass before winter set in proper. Some did not make it. Bodies turn up come spring sometimes. What happens to the baby? Ethan asked, his arms tightening protectively around the small bundle. Orphanage in Denver, most likely, unless someone claims her. You did a good thing, Zeller. Most men would not have bothered. Ethan felt sick at the thought of handing this child over to an orphanage. He had heard stories about those places, overcrowded and underfunded, where children died of disease and neglect. This baby had survived impossible odds. She deserved better. I will keep her, Ethan said, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. Until someone claims her. She is doing well with me. Sheriff Morgan raised an eyebrow. You know how to care for an infant, I am learning, and she is thriving. The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I will put out notices, see if anyone comes forward. But Zeller, if you are taking responsibility for that child, you need to understand what you are getting into. Babies need more than just food and warmth. They need constant care. I understand. Back at the cabin, Ethan set about making his home more suitable for an infant. He fashioned a cradle from a wooden crate, lined it with his softest blankets. He bought supplies in town, proper cloth for diapers, bottles that the general store owner swore would work for feeding, more goat's milk. He even bought a book about infant care, written by a doctor in Boston, and read it cover to cover by lamplight while the baby slept. He named her Hope, because that was what she had given him without even trying. 2 weeks passed. Ethan fell into a routine, his days revolving around Hope's needs. He woke every few hours through the night to feed her, changed her diapers, sang her the old songs his mother had sung to him in Texas. His trapline suffered, but he did not care. For the first time in years, his cabin felt like a home instead of just a place to sleep. On the 15th day, someone knocked on his door. Ethan was feeding Hope when he heard it, a tentative sound barely louder than the wind. He set the baby in her cradle and crossed to the door, his hand instinctively moving to the rifle mounted above the frame. Visitors were rare this far from town, especially in winter. When he opened the door, a woman stood on his porch, and Ethan's breath caught. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair that hung in tangles around a face that was pale with exhaustion and marked by frostbite. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and she swayed on her feet like she might collapse at any moment. But it was her eyes that stopped him, dark eyes that were full of fear and desperate hope. "My baby," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, is my baby here?" Ethan stared at her, his mind racing. This was the mother, it had to be. Those eyes were the same color as Hope's, that same unusual depth. "You left her in the snow," he said, his voice harder than he intended. The woman's face crumpled. "I had no choice. Please, is she alive?" "Tell me she is alive." Behind him, Hope made a small sound, and the woman's reaction was immediate. She tried to push past him, but her legs gave out and she collapsed against the doorframe. Ethan caught her automatically, feeling how light she was, how she was barely more than skin and bone. "She is alive," he said quickly, seeing the panic in the woman's eyes. "She is healthy. Come inside before you freeze to death." He half carried her into the cabin and set her in the chair nearest the fire. She was shaking violently, her lips blue with cold. He grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders, then picked up Hope from the cradle. The moment the woman saw the baby, she made a sound that was half sob, half prayer. "She is all right," Ethan said, bringing Hope closer so the woman could see. "A little underweight when I found her, but she is getting stronger every day." The woman reached out with trembling hands, touching Hope's cheek with infinite gentleness. Tears streamed down her face, cutting tracks through the dirt. Thank God, thank God, I thought I would never see her again. I thought she was dead. Why did you leave her? The question came out more accusatory than Ethan intended, but he needed to understand. He had spent 2 weeks caring for this child, falling in love with her, and the thought of someone deliberately abandoning her made his blood hot. The woman looked up at him, and the anguish in her eyes made him regret his harsh tone. I did not want to. You have to believe me. I would rather die than hurt her. Then explain. He pulled a chair closer and sat down, hope still in his arms. Tell me what happened. The woman took a shaking breath. My name is Rose Whitfield. I was traveling with my husband's family heading to California. We got caught in the storm 3 weeks ago. My husband died the second day. Pneumonia. His family blamed me, said I was bad luck. When food started running low, they said the baby was using up resources we did not have. They said we should leave her behind. Ethan felt rage building in his chest, but he forced himself to stay quiet and let her continue. I refused. I fought them. But I was weak from childbirth and they were stronger. One night while I slept, they took my baby and rode off. When I woke and realized what they had done, I stole a horse and went after them. I tracked them for 2 days. I found where they had left her, wrapped in that cloth. But the snow had already covered her tracks and I could not find her. I searched for hours, calling for her, but there was nothing. I thought she was dead. I thought I had lost her forever. Her voice broke on the last words and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. I kept searching. I knew it was hopeless, but I could not give up. I have been wandering these mountains for 2 weeks, looking for any sign of her. I was ready to die. I wanted to die. But then I heard in town that someone had found a baby and I had to know. I had to see if it was her. Ethan looked down at Hope, who gazed up at him with those dark eyes, and felt the world shift beneath him. This woman had not abandoned her child. She had been fighting to save her. Everything he had assumed was wrong. She is yours, he said quietly, holding out the baby. She belongs with her mother. Rose took Hope with hands that shook, cradling the infant against her chest and weeping into her hair. The reunion was painful to watch, raw and honest, and full of the kind of love that Ethan had only read about in books. He turned away, giving them privacy, and busied himself preparing food. When he set a bowl of stew in front of Rose, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Thank you for saving her, for keeping her alive. I owe you everything. You owe me nothing. Anyone would have done the same. No, Rose said firmly. They would not have. My husband's family proved that. Most people would have taken her to an orphanage and forgotten about her. You took her into your home. You cared for her like she was your own. That is not nothing. Ethan sat down across from her, watching as she ate with one hand while holding Hope with the other. The baby had fallen asleep against her mother's chest, content in a way he had never quite managed to achieve. It hurt, seeing that, knowing he would have to let them go. Where will you go? He asked. Rose's expression faltered. I do not know. I have no money, no family. My husband's people are somewhere on the trail to California, but I would rather die than go back to them. She looked down at Hope, her face full of love and fear. I will figure something out. I have to. You could stay here, Ethan said, the words escaping before he could think them through. Just for a while, until you get your strength back and figure out your next steps. Rose looked up at him, her eyes wide. I could not impose on you like that. It is not an imposition. You are in no condition to travel, and neither is Hope. The winter up here is brutal. You would not make it a week. But you do not know me. I am a stranger. You are Hope's mother. That is all I need to know. He hesitated, then added, please, let us stay, both of you. The way he phrased it, echoing what he imagined she had been wanting to ask but was too proud to say, made Rose's eyes fill with tears again. She looked at him, really looked at him and seemed to see something that made her decision easier. "All right," she whispered. "Just until spring. Then we will get out of your way." "You are not in my way," Ethan said, and meant it. The first few days were awkward. Rose was weak and still recovering from her ordeal, and Ethan found himself continuing to care for Hope while Rose regained her strength. He showed her everything he had learned about feeding the baby, changing her, soothing her when she cried. Rose watched him with an expression he could not quite read, something between gratitude and wonder. "You are good with her," she said one evening, watching him rock Hope to sleep. "Natural. I had to learn fast. She did not exactly come with instructions." Rose smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face. Despite the fading frostbite and the gauntness from starvation, she was beautiful. The realization hit Ethan like a physical blow, and he quickly looked away, focusing on the baby in his arms. "Tell me about yourself," Rose said, settling into the chair across from him. "I am living in your home, eating your food, but I know nothing about you except that you are the kind of man who saves abandoned babies." Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "Not much to tell. I came out here 10 years ago after my father died. My brother inherited the family ranch in Texas, and I wanted to make my own way. I have been trapping and hunting ever since. It is a quiet life, but it suits me. No wife, no family. No, I guess I never found the right person. Or maybe the right person never found me." He glanced at her. "What about you? What brought you out west?" Rose's expression darkened. "My husband, Thomas. We married when I was 18. He was 10 years older, seemed steady and reliable. He wanted to try his luck in the California goldfields, said we would be rich within a year. I should have known better, but I was young and believed in his dreams. His family came with us. His mother, his 2 brothers, and their wives. They never liked me, thought Thomas had married beneath him. When things went bad, I was the easiest person to blame. They were wrong to blame you. And they were monsters to try and leave your baby to die. I know. But knowing that does not make it hurt less. Thomas died thinking I was a burden. His last words to me were an apology for not being strong enough to protect me from his family. He knew what they would do." The pain in her voice made Ethan want to reach out and comfort her, but he held himself back. She was grieving and vulnerable. The last thing she needed was him complicating things with feelings he had no right to have. As the days turned into weeks, a routine developed. Rose grew stronger, her body recovering from the ordeal she had endured. She took over most of Hope's care, but Ethan found himself reluctant to give up the duties he had grown accustomed to. They fell into an easy partnership, trading off feedings and diaper changes, working together to keep the cabin running and the baby happy. Rose insisted on earning her keep. She cooked meals that were far better than anything Ethan had made in years, using the simple ingredients he had on hand to create dishes that filled the cabin with warmth and delicious smells. She mended his clothes, which had been in sorry shape from years of rough use. She cleaned and organized, turning his bachelor cabin into something that felt like a real home. At night, after Hope was asleep, they would sit by the fire and talk. Rose told him about growing up in Missouri, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. She had learned to read young and loved books, a passion Ethan shared. He showed her his small collection of novels and history books, and they took turns reading aloud to each other while the wind howled outside. "I have missed this," Rose said one night, closing the book they had been reading. Having someone to talk to. Thomas was not much of a conversationalist. He was always thinking about the next thing, the next opportunity. He never just sat and enjoyed the moment. "That sounds lonely," Ethan said. "It was. I loved him, but we were not really partners." He made all the decisions and I was just expected to follow along. She looked at Ethan, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. You are different. You listen when I talk. You ask my opinion. I am not used to that. You are intelligent and capable. Your opinions matter. The way she looked at him made Ethan's heart race. There was something building between them, something he did not know how to name but could feel as surely as the heat from the fire. He wanted to reach out to touch her hand, to tell her that she could stay forever if she wanted, but he held back. She was still grieving her husband. She was still recovering from trauma. He had no right to burden her with his growing feelings. Winter deepened. The snow piled higher, making trips to town nearly impossible. Ethan did not mind. He had enough supplies to last months, and more importantly, he had Rose and hope. The cabin that had once felt empty now felt full in the best possible way. He woke to the sound of Hope babbling and Rose singing softly as she prepared breakfast. He spent his days checking trap lines or chopping wood, always eager to return home to their warmth. He fell asleep to the sound of Rose's breathing in the corner where she slept with Hope, a sound that had become as necessary to him as air. One evening in late February, a warm spell hit the mountains, melting some of the snow and making the world feel less hostile. Ethan suggested they take a walk, and Rose eagerly agreed. They bundled Hope carefully and stepped outside into air that, while still cold, felt almost pleasant compared to the bitter temperatures they had endured. They walked to a ridge that overlooked the valley, the view spectacular in the fading light. The mountains stretched out in every direction, their peaks painted pink and gold by the setting sun. Rose stood beside him, Hope tucked against her chest and breathed in the clean air. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "I was so focused on survival when I first came out here that I never really looked at it, but it is incredible." "That is why I stay," Ethan said. "Even when the winters are hard and the solitude gets to me, I look at this view and remember why I came here. There is a freedom in these mountains that I never found anywhere else." Rose turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Ethan, I need to tell you something. I need to thank you properly for everything you have done. You saved my daughter's life. You saved my life. You have given us a home when we had nothing. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "I do not want repayment, Rose. I did what anyone decent would do." "No, you did more than that. You opened your home and your heart to strangers. You have been kinder to me than my own family, kinder than my husband's family, kinder than anyone I have ever known. You have made me feel valued and respected and safe. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" Her eyes were shining with tears, and Ethan felt his resolve crumbling. "Rose, I need to tell you something too. These past weeks, having you and Hope here, it has changed everything for me. This cabin was just a place I existed before. Now it is a home. You have made it a home. And I know you are planning to leave come spring, and I understand why, but I need you to know that I do not want you to go. I want you to stay. Not because you owe me anything, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Rose's breath caught. "Ethan, I am not asking you to make any promises. I know it is too soon. You are still grieving Thomas, and that is right and proper. But I needed you to know. When spring comes, if you decide to leave, I will help you however I can. I will give you money, supplies, whatever you need. But if you want to stay, if there is any part of you that thinks maybe you could be happy here, then please know that I would count myself the luckiest man alive." Rose was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the mountains. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I stopped grieving Thomas weeks ago. That makes me sound heartless, but it is the truth. I mourned him when he died, but our marriage was not some great love story. It was practical, based on convenience and mutual need more than passion. These weeks with you have shown me what a real partnership looks like. I have been happy here, Ethan. Happier than I have been in years. When I think about leaving, my heart breaks." Ethan turned to face her fully, hardly daring to hope. "Then do not leave. Stay, build a life here with me. Let me help you raise Hope. Let me be the father she needs and the partner you deserve." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Rose asked, her eyes searching his face. "Eventually, yes, if you will have me, but I'm not rushing you. We can take all the time you need. I just want you to know that my feelings are real and my intentions are serious. I love you, Rose. I love Hope. I want us to be a family." Rose's tears spilled over, but she was smiling. "I love you too. I did not think I could feel this way again, did not think I deserved to. But you have shown me that love can be gentle and patient and kind. I want to stay, Ethan. I want to build a life with you. I want Hope to grow up knowing you as her father. If you are certain this is what you want, then yes. Yes to all of it." Ethan cupped her face gently, mindful of the baby between them, and kissed her. It was soft and sweet, a promise more than a demand. Rose leaned into him, and for a moment the whole world narrowed to just the three of them on that mountain ridge, the sunset painting them in shades of gold. Spring came slowly to the Colorado Rockies, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it a sense of renewal. Ethan and Rose were married by Sheriff Morgan in Leadville on a warm day in April, with Hope bundled in Rose's arms and a handful of townspeople serving as witnesses. Rose wore a simple blue dress that Ethan had bought for her in town, and she carried wildflowers that he had picked that morning. She had never looked more beautiful. They settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Ethan taught Rose how to shoot and hunt, skills she took to with enthusiasm. Rose taught Ethan how to read the subtle signs of Hope's needs, how to tell a hungry cry from a tired one, how to soothe her with specific songs. They worked together on everything, from running trap lines to maintaining the cabin to caring for their daughter, because Hope was their daughter now, in every way that mattered. Ethan had formally adopted her with Rose's blessing, and his name appeared on the paperwork as her father. The first time Hope called him Papa, a babbled sound that was barely coherent but clearly intentional, Ethan cried. Rose held his hand and cried with him, both of them overwhelmed by the beauty of the family they had built from tragedy. That summer, Rose discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Ethan fussed over her constantly, worried about her health after everything she had been through. Rose tolerated his concern with good humor, reminding him that she had already survived childbirth once under far worse conditions. "I am stronger now," she told him one evening, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "I have you, I have a home. I have proper food and warmth and medical care nearby. This baby will be born into love, Ethan. That makes all the difference." Their son was born the following February, a healthy, squalling boy with Ethan's lighter hair and Rose's dark eyes. They named him Samuel, after Ethan's father, and from the moment he entered the world, Hope was fascinated by him. At 15 months old, she would sit beside his cradle for hours, reaching through the slats to touch his tiny hands, singing to him in her nonsense language. "She is going to be a wonderful big sister," Rose said, watching Hope's devotion with a soft smile. "She learned from the best mother," Ethan replied, pulling Rose against him and kissing the top of her head. Life was not always easy. The mountains were unforgiving, and there were hard winters and lean times. But they faced everything together, a united front against whatever challenges came their way. Ethan's trapping business grew, and he became known throughout the territory as a fair and honest trader. Rose started a small garden and learned to preserve food, ensuring they always had supplies to last through the brutal winters. She also began tutoring children from nearby families, using her education to help others while earning extra money for their household. Hope grew into a bright, curious child with a fearless spirit that both delighted and terrified her parents. She learned to ride before she could properly walk, and by the time she was 5, she could track animals and read signs in the wilderness better than most grown men. Samuel was quieter, more contemplative, but equally intelligent. He loved books the way his mother did, and Ethan would often find him curled up in Rose's lap while she read to him for hours. When Hope was 7 and Samuel was 5, Rose gave birth to their third child, a daughter they named Grace. She was born in late spring during a particularly beautiful May when the wildflowers covered the mountain meadows in riots of color. Grace had Rose's dark hair and Ethan's smile, and she seemed to embody the peace and love that filled their home. The years passed in a blur of hard work and harder-won joy. Ethan built additions onto the cabin as their family grew, creating separate rooms for the children and more space for Rose's books and teaching supplies. They became pillars of the small community that was growing around Leadville, known for their generosity and kindness. Other families would come to them for advice, for help, for the simple comfort of being around people who so clearly loved each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan took Rose back to the ridge where he had first told her he loved her. The children were with a neighbor for the night, giving them rare time alone. They stood in the same spot, watching the sunset paint the mountains in familiar gold and pink. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked, holding her hand. "The life you could have had if you had gone to California, if things had been different." Rose looked at him with those dark eyes that still made his heart race after all these years. "Not for a single moment. This life here with you, it is more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me everything, Ethan. You gave me love, family, purpose, safety. You gave me myself back when I thought I had lost her forever. You did the same for me. I was just existing before you came. You taught me how to live, how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself." They kissed as the sun set, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from tragedy. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal, witnesses to their love. Hope grew into a beautiful young woman, strong and independent with a gift for healing. She apprenticed with the doctor who had moved to Leadville and eventually became a healer in her own right, serving the mining communities that sprang up throughout the Rockies. She married a good man, a mining engineer from Pennsylvania who respected her intelligence and supported her work, and they gave Ethan and Rose their first grandchildren. Samuel followed a different path. His love of learning led him east to university, a journey that broke Rose's heart even as she supported it. He studied law and returned to Colorado, setting up practice in Denver, where he fought for miners' rights and fair labor practices. He married a schoolteacher and brought her home to meet his family, and Rose wept with joy seeing her quiet son so happy and successful. Grace, their youngest, stayed close to home. She had inherited Rose's gift for teaching and Ethan's love of the mountains. She taught at the school that had been built in Leadville, and she married one of the local ranchers, a young man whose family had homesteaded nearby. She and her husband built their home within sight of Ethan and Rose's cabin, ensuring that Rose would always have at least one of her children close. As the years continued their relentless march, Ethan and Rose grew old together. Ethan's hair went white, and his hands became gnarled from arthritis, but he still checked his trap lines every day he was able. Rose's eyes grew weaker, and she needed spectacles to read, but she still tutored children and read aloud to Ethan every night before bed. They moved slower, tired more easily, but the love between them never dimmed. On a cold January morning in 1911, 35 years after Ethan had found hope in the snow, he woke to find Rose watching him with a soft smile. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice rough with age. "About how lucky I am, how blessed we have been." She reached out and touched his weathered face with gentle fingers. "I found you in my darkest moment, Ethan. You were my miracle. You were mine," he replied, taking her hand and kissing her palm. "Every day with you has been a gift." They rose slowly, helping each other as they had learned to do, and went about their morning routine. Ethan built up the fire while Rose prepared breakfast. They moved around each other with the practiced ease of decades together, anticipating each other's needs without words. Later that day, Hope came to visit with her youngest daughter, bringing news that she was going to be a grandmother herself. The joy on Rose's face at the news made her look young again, erasing the lines that time had carved. "A great-grandchild," Rose breathed, her eyes shining. "Oh, Ethan, can you believe it?" "With you, I can believe anything," he replied, pulling her close. That evening, after Hope had left and they were alone again, Ethan and Rose sat by the fire as they had done thousands of times before. Rose was reading aloud from one of their favorite novels, her voice still clear and strong despite her age. Ethan listened with his eyes closed, content in a way that went bone deep. When Rose finished the chapter, she set the book aside and looked at her husband. "Ethan, do you remember what you said to me that day on the ridge, when you asked me to stay?" "Every word. I told you I wanted you to stay not because you owed me anything, but because I could not imagine my life without you in it. I want you to know that staying was the best decision I ever made. These 35 years with you have been the greatest adventure of my life. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for loving Hope. Thank you for giving us a home when we had nothing." Ethan opened his eyes and looked at her, this woman who had walked into his life broken and desperate and transformed it into something miraculous. "Thank you for letting me love you, for building this life with me, for every sunrise and sunset and everything in between. I would do it all again in a heartbeat, Rose. Every single moment." They held each other close, two old people who had weathered decades together and come through stronger for it. Outside, snow began to fall, the same eternal snow that had brought them together all those years ago. But inside their cabin, warmed by fire and love and memories, they were safe. The seasons continued their cycle. Spring followed winter, summer followed spring, and autumn brought its golden glory before winter returned again. Ethan and Rose celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even that first great-grandchild, a squirming baby boy who looked up at his great-grandfather with curious eyes. "His name is Ethan," Hope told them, placing the baby in Rose's arms. "We named him after the man who saved my life and gave me everything that matters." Rose cried, and Ethan cried, and their children and grandchildren cried with them, overwhelmed by the beautiful continuity of family and love. When Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 88, Rose grieved deeply, but without regret. They had been married for 42 years, and every one of those years had been full of love. She was surrounded by family during her grief, held up by the legacy they had built together. Rose lived another 3 years after Ethan's death, cared for by Grace and visited constantly by Hope and Samuel, and the growing number of grandchildren and great-grandchildren who all adored her. She spent her final years telling stories about Ethan, about their life together, about the man who had found a baby in the snow and changed the course of so many lives with one act of kindness. When Rose died at 89, she was buried next to Ethan on a hillside overlooking the mountains they had both loved. Their children carved a simple inscription on the shared headstone. Together they built a home from nothing and love from everything. The cabin where it all began still stood, maintained lovingly by Grace and her children. It became a family gathering place, where descendants of Ethan and Rose would come to remember and celebrate the love story that had started with an abandoned baby in the snow. Hope, who lived to be 93 years old, would bring her great-great-grandchildren to the cabin and tell them the story of how she had been found, how she had been saved, how her mother had come back and asked to stay, and how two broken people had healed each other and built something beautiful. She would tell them about the love between Ethan and Rose, a love that had sustained them through hardship and joy, through decades of life lived fully and deeply. Never underestimate the power of kindness, Hope would tell the children gathered at her feet. My father could have left me in that snow. My mother could have given up searching for me. But they both fought, and they both loved, and because of that, all of you exist. We are all here because one man chose compassion over convenience, and one woman chose hope over despair. That is the legacy they left us. That is what we must carry forward. And the children would listen, their eyes wide with wonder, and they would understand that they came from love, real and true and enduring. They would understand that families were not just made by blood, but by choice, by sacrifice, by the daily decision to show up and care and fight for each other. They would understand that the best things in life often came from the hardest circumstances, and that love, real love, could transform everything. The story of Ethan Zeller and Rose Whitfield became legend in the Colorado mountains, passed down through generations. It was a story of survival and second chances, a family born not from obligation but from choice. It was a story that reminded people that even in the darkest winter, even in the coldest snow, hope could survive if someone was brave enough to reach out and fight for it. Years turned into decades, decades into a century, but the story endured. Great-great-great-grandchildren who never knew Ethan and Rose still knew their names, still knew what they represented. The cabin on the mountain, carefully preserved, became a historical site, a place where people could come and feel the echo of that extraordinary love. On cold January mornings, when snow fell thick and fast over the Colorado Rockies, people would sometimes think of Ethan trudging through a blizzard with a baby tucked against his heart. They would think of Rose, searching desperately for her lost child. They would think of the moment when two strangers became a family, when three lives intersected and changed each other forever. And they would understand, in that deep way that transcends words, that this was what it meant to be human, to find someone in need and help them, to be found when you are lost, to build something beautiful from broken pieces, to love so completely that it echoes through generations, touching lives that will never know your name but will forever be shaped by your choices. Ethan Zeller found an abandoned baby in the snow on a bitter January morning in 1876. The mother returned and said, "Please let us stay." And he said yes, not knowing that one word would create a legacy of love that would endure long after both of them were gone. A testament to the transformative power of compassion, courage, and the kind of love that saves lives and builds families and changes the world, one small act of kindness at a time.